there were 6,000 languages spoken on Earth. Now, a language is not just a body of grammar, a set of words. A language is a reflection of culture. It's a flash of the human spirit. And of the 6,000 languages spoken on Earth, fully half are being taught to children, which means that effectively, unless something changes, they're dead. What this means is that within a single generation, we may be losing fully half of humanity's intellectual, social, and spiritual legacy. This does not have to happen. These cultures are not failed attempts at being modern. They're unique answers to a fundamental question. What does it mean to be human and alive? Peru is a place I've been many times, but this is an entirely new adventure. A journey of the spirit, a pilgrimage to the sacred heart of the Andes, and light at the edge of the world.
Hasta la cumbre más todo.
It is May, harvest time.
Sin la coca no sé.
Coca es bueno siempre. Da fuerzas.
Para limpiar.
Friends and neighbors have a breakfast of fresh potato soup and get ready to help Don Geronimo bring in his barley crop.
Y mi ahijado, el hijo de exaltación, él estaba.
These are the people of the Andes, still living on the land of their Incan ancestors.
Pero lo hemos logrado, ¿no?
Sí.
Hemos logrado.
Sí.
With each step, they are walking through a landscape that they consider to be truly sacred. To them, the land is alive. The mountains are mystical beings. The entire economy of the rural Andes is based on the exchange of labor, reciprocal relationships and obligations, never spoken about but never forgotten. Ritual exchange also defines the relationship between people and the land. Pachamama, Mother Earth, will look after them as long as she is treated with the proper care and reverence. We use too casually this notion, the earth is alive. It's kind of entered the lexicon of what I call hippie ethnography. But in the case of the Andes, they really did believe that the earth was alive, resonant, responsive in 1,000 ways to the human imagination. Indeed, the earth itself only existed because it was filtered through the human imagination. Don Geronimo's crops are planted at 3,500 meters in terraced fields. We're standing in one of the birthplaces of agriculture, one of the great centers of plant domestication on the planet. This is a land that gave us not just the tomato and the potato, but countless other vital cultigens. The people of the Andes believe that the fertility of their fields and the success of their crops depends directly on their relationship with the sacred mountains. Every community is dominated by a specific protective deity, a mountain known as an Apu. An Apu is an ancestral being. It is a mountain that oversees your immediate destiny. It is a mountain that rises over every community, and every individual community has its specific Apu. It's not the size of the Apu that matters. It's its placement in sacred geography.
Compadres, gracias. Gerónimo, gracias.
You must make offerings to that Apu. That Apu in turn must give you what you need: fertility, rain. So as you propitiate the spirit in the classic Andean reciprocal way, the spirit will come home to benefit you. You and I were raised in Canada to believe that those mountains are just inert bodies of rock ready to be mined. The children we've been with in Chinchero know that those are the Apu spirits that will direct their destiny. Is that mountain a pile of ore, or is it a spiritual entity? How a society answers that question ultimately defines how it will treat the land. After helping my friends with the harvest, I want, out of respect, to make my own offering to the Apu of Chinchero. I've come to Cusco Central Market with my friend and colleague, Johan Reinhardt, to buy the right magical ingredients.
Buenas, señora, señoritas. Tiene despachos para vender.
Libro de San Cipriano, have you ever seen this? This is associated with witchcraft. It's the saint, and people read this and create spells and stuff from it and everything. It's quite big, particularly when they're doing that, even with human sacrifices. See this? This is the embryo of a vicuña, so this is quite rare. It's 100 soles. 100 soles, which is $30 or so. These are the makings of a despacho, a bundle filled with symbolic objects and herbs bound together as an offering. The dried fetuses represent the spirits of unborn animals. In making them part of an offering, I am asking the mountain to continue the cycle of life. People are getting ready for their annual pilgrimage high into the Andes to make sacrifices and prayers to the mountains. The arrival of the Spaniards in the early 16th century unleashed a cataclysm. But out of that terrible encounter emerged a remarkable pan-Andean culture that draws inspiration from both Christianity and ancient Andean ideas. Beliefs in sacred geography, the relationships to the land, which predated the Inca, were so strong that they survived even the Spanish conquest. The Spaniards did everything in their power to crush the spirit of the Andes, destroying all religious icons and temples. But every time the Spaniards planted a cross or built a church on top of the demolished temple, they simply affirmed in the eyes of the people the inherent sacredness of the place. Chinchero is like a second home to me. I first lived here in 1981 when I came with a team of botanists to study the plants of the valley. Now I have compadres here, and godchildren. Personally, when I go back to Chinchero, I absolutely adore the fact that as I walk into the community, I feel swallowed by the community. Virtually every encounter with the people of Chinchero involves the exchange of coca leaves, the most sacred plant of the Andes. Coca, of course, yields the drug cocaine, but when taken in natural form as a leaf, it is a mild stimulant that is highly nutritious. I love chewing coca. I can't imagine being in the Andes without it. But to compare coca with cocaine would be like comparing the luscious fruit of a peach with the poison found in the pit. The first offering of coca always goes to the Apu. There is a tremendous excitement in town. It's a time of harvest, of great annual celebrations, and of pilgrimages to the sacred mountains. But before leaving Chinchero, I need to have the ingredients I bought in Cusco assembled into a despacho and blessed by a curandero. For that I turn to an old friend, Don Lorenzo, a remarkable ritual specialist. Some people say that Don Lorenzo gained his power by having been struck by lightning.
En nombre del Padre, Espíritu Santo,
The ingredients range from a tiny crucifix implanted in the fat of a llama to seashells carried up from the ocean and seeds and feathers brought from the jungle. A key ingredient is always coca.
It's a very specific ritual moment where you take 3 perfect leaves and make a cruceta and you salute the Apus, and the idea is that you're blowing the energy of the divine to the Apu so that it as the water becomes a cloud and the cloud then condenses into rain to give life to the field, so too the energy of the leaf is going back to the sacred Apu.
Estados Unidos. Then,
in a very meticulous order, you put your offerings, your symbolic offerings, on top of the leaves. Eventually creating, through this specific methodology, a package that you will then take discreetly to a fire and burn. And of course the essence of the despacho goes into the heavens, but more importantly is once that despacho is being burned, everybody must get out of there because it's become a sacred space.
The smoke will rise to the mountaintops. That's where the Chinchero pilgrims are going, up where it's high and cold, in the presence of the most powerful Apus. And I'm going with them. Pilgrimage has been a central feature of Andean life since the beginning of memory. We know that Incan priests climbed to the summits of mountains,
some as high as 6,500 meters, to make sacrifices. In the wake of the Spanish conquest, these pilgrimages to the mountains carried on. Nilda Kalanaupa and her family have taught me much of what I know about Chinchero. She's often spoken of the Coyariti, the Star Snow Festival, held each year high in the Andes 2 days from here. I've always wanted to go, and now we have a chance to go together.
Coyariti, Coilor, is a star, morning star. Riti is snow. It's a pilgrimage today called.
The Coyariti is a truly pan-Andean pilgrimage. Just as the people in Chinchero are donning their ritual costumes, which in some cases they've been preparing for a year, so too are people in communities throughout the mountains.
How many groups will go from Chinchero to Coyariti?
They say over 70
groups. And how many people per group, roughly?
Probably like 60, 50.
60 to 50 per group?
Yes.
So 70 times 50.
Yes.
Ay, gracias. Muy amable, gracias.
That's what I would do. Gracias. And this is one of the very only pilgrimage.
So
it's very mixed up with the Catholic and the Inca religion.
And when you just everybody says it's a fusion of Catholicism and traditional ancient Andean beliefs, but how do you, as a child of the Andes, where do you see the various things come in? What is Andean and what is Catholic?
And you don't like to talk about that, and you don't like separate it because they're very nicely mixed,
But are the people aware of the fact that there are these two worlds that came together? Is that just something that anthropologists talk about? Or for the people of the Andes, is it just one single religious impulse?
For us, it's one single impulse, because once you start dividing, which one is Catholic, which one is, it's just headache, it's you're losing your identity, and there is no way that we are going to divide those two worlds, One of the ways you make your life very miserable, and you don't fit.
And the two together become who you are.
Yes.
Everybody, the day before the Coyariti, gets their costumes together, participates in the procession up to the church, has a kind of fiesta, and then comes back down and gets ready to leave. Do they leave tonight?
Yes, they leave tonight.
There will be no sleep, no rest over the next 3 days. But giving of oneself is the point, in a place where the people feel they need to earn their blessings in the presence of the mountains.
The amazing thing, Johan, as you walk along these ridges and these trails, you have this extraordinary sense of how the network of roads, trails, bridges just link the entire empire together.
As a cultural anthropologist and high-altitude archaeologist, Johan Reinhardt has devoted much of his career to understanding Andean notions of sacred geography. In search of Incan sites, he has climbed well over 100 Andean peaks.
By a rope, because they had to have built it up. And how do you get the rocks? Somebody must have been handing rocks down to them in order to keep it being built up. And you have this play on using the traditional
structure of the rock. So this side here is
one of our problems about understanding the Incas is that we don't have historical documents from there. They didn't have any writings, so you have to kind of make do with the archaeology or historical references. Well, the interesting thing about this is, compared to other sites I've been at, this is a series of interconnected. It's funny because when I got down here the first time, I was more amazed at how the Incas were able to not just populate the land, but actually make it to the summits of these great peaks. And they reached heights that people didn't even get to again for 400 years.
And when they did the human sacrifices, is that one of the reasons that they were done on the mountaintops? And was it a direct sense that being that high, the spirit of the sacrificial individual would go straight to the heavens?
There's no account of that kind of belief, and frankly I doubt that was exactly the way they thought it. I think those peaks themselves were sacred before they ever got there, for the reasons.
So the sacrifice was to the actual specific apple?
Well, I mean, they would have also, I think, given some kind of invocation to the sun and some of the other great deities of the Inca Empire, but the reason that they're on that particular peak, I think, is because of the peak itself.
Well, Johann Reinhardt is one of my closest friends. He's also the godfather of my youngest daughter. He's also the greatest high-altitude archaeologist probably in history. He began a systematic exploration, climbing over 200 peaks, over 5,000 meters and higher, searching for Incan sacrifices, and what he found was nothing short of extraordinary. It changed history, because you can imagine what it's like to try to do archaeological excavation at 22,000 feet.
It's resting to about 70 miles an hour probably, so maybe more.
But if you go back one step and ask, well, why is a mountain important? You think of this landscape, earthquakes, most probably recently created major mountain chain on Earth, incredibly dynamic, storms that sweep through on summer and winter days.
Well, I can give you just one example from here. In 1983, there was a hailstorm for about 15 minutes. 90% of the maize crop was destroyed.
Well, exactly.
And they believe that, the mountain gods control the weather. So what happened? I mean, what did they do that kind of provoked the mountain gods, or what did somebody else do?
In 1995, Johann made one of the greatest discoveries in the history of Andean archaeology. Near the summit of Mount Ampato, at an elevation where most people can barely breathe, he found the mummified remains of a young girl sacrificed over 500 years ago. One of the reasons you do what you do is because what we're trying to do is illuminate another way of being, another way of thinking, and to come upon the mummy in the ice must have been an extraordinary affirmation of all your intuitions about the notion of sacred geography. I mean, this is the epitome of everything you're thinking of. A child who would be given to the mountain with the expectation of gifts coming back from the mountain to the people. A child who would sacrifice her life gratefully in some sense, with the support of her family, with the blessings of the religious structures around her, all with the goal of benefiting her community, and in this sense, benefiting the entire empire.
And the thing is, she never stopped benefiting. I mean, they would be in contact with her as virtually another deity. And in the cases that we have, actual references as to the worship of these sacrifices, they would be speaking through some of the shamans and be able to answer their requests and so on. And
how was she killed?
Well, only when we took the mummy to Johns Hopkins and they did a 3D stereolithographic CAT scan did it really come out clear that there was a fracture in her head, and she'd obviously been hit by a blow to the head.
Her death was not a death as much as a birth into eternity.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It would never stop in their minds. This was, 500 years. We're here 500 years later. We could still be talking with her.
The word sacrifice is derived from the Latin, to make sacred. A pilgrimage is itself a sacred gesture that takes an individual from his community through landscape to a place of the divine.
This is the last bus stop, and from here we got to go up. This is pilgrimage, so we got to walk. It's an effort to do that.
So the effort is part of the sacrifice. The sacrifice is part of the devotion.
Yes, and people from all over the place since Bolivia came down here to start the pilgrimage. Here it starts the pilgrimage.
It's a 9-kilometer walk to the sacred valley of Sinicara, with the trail rising steadily from the roadhead. Stone altars mark the route, one for every kilometer of the journey, like stations of the cross. From here we can just see Ausangati, the most powerful apu of the Inca. At each of the altars, the pilgrims stop to pray and make offerings. Finally we reach the Sinicara Valley, the natural amphitheater of the Coyariti. The three faces of the Colcapunco Glacier front the valley like an altar, 800 meters above the Sinicara floor. There are more than 25,000 pilgrims camped in the meadows. These Pablitos are central figures in the pageant. They are masked men from all of the communities, hundreds of tricksters dressed as bears and charged with keeping the peace, controlling the crowds, and ultimately performing the most important rites in the glacier at the festival's end. Most of the year this valley is grazing land, quiet and isolated, but now it is transformed into a 3-day spectacle. Mock battles break out between Pablitos and men dressed as Chinchus, warriors from jungle tribes wearing headdresses festooned with parrot feathers. These staged charges, performed as dances, symbolize ancient battles, real and imagined. If you look at pictures of the Coyariti festival from the 1930s, There were in fact far fewer people here then than there are today. Having seen so many places around the world where ancient traditions are disappearing, I find it simply thrilling to be at a festival so vibrant and alive.
It's a moment to think about your life, how you are behaving with the people, what bad things you are doing, what you would ask in the future for you, for your family, for your community, for your children, etc. That's the moment for you, the spiritual part of your life, And the next part is share the richness of the culture of your community and another communities there, without thinking your job, without thinking your family, without thinking anybody else, concentrating your memory in that celebration,
Cualquier rato, estoy en tu lado, hasta que venga, póngase paro. Muy bien. Ahora, ustedes, ahora comes, beber.
When you go to the snow, it's totally different feeling, about your reflection, about how much power those mountains has, That's for me, really little.
The music and dancing never stop. There is an incredible sense of goodwill. It takes a while, but Nilda and I finally tracked down the contingent of dancers from Chinchero.
Por fin le encontramos, nos vemos encontrar.
¿Qué tal? Buenas tardes, ¿cómo está? Buenas tardes.
Here is everything is ritual, it's a dance. When they come to dance, especially for the younger ones, one way maybe to incorporate into this society, through this, festivities.
Y hoy noche también va por...
Esta noche va a ser peor.
Sí, igual para el resto.
Vamos a ver a las 7 comienza la serenata.
Y después tiene que subir hasta
Después a medianoche
tiene que subir.
comienza a subir ya al nevado.
The thing is, I got no sleep last night. They are going to start dancing tonight, and they'll dance all the way until they start moving up to the glacier. Incredible.
They can sleep later, because the Coyariti is a place to celebrate and to pray for happy marriages and healthy babies, good harvests and long lives.
It's almost a life cycle ritual to be one of the dancers. There's a lot of young kids there, and that's part of their process of going through different societal stages within their own communities, right?
Well, that's what one of the things Nilda was explaining, is that to take on the obligation of becoming a dancer, let alone a dance leader, is also a passage rite. It's a way of moving from adolescence into manhood.
At a time when indigenous peoples and languages throughout the world are being lost, the Pan-Andean culture only seems to be getting stronger. There are over 6 million people who speak Quechua as their mother tongue. 500 years of European domination, with all manner of injustice, has nevertheless failed to quell the essential spirit of the Andes. Landscape holds the key to culture, and the strength of the people of the Andes springs from their relationship to the land.
place to understand that relationship than the ancient city of Machu Picchu. When Machu Picchu was discovered in 1911 by Hiram Bingham, it was famously described as a lost city.
What I like to think of is just what it must have been like when the Incas, when this was going full blown, because these trails would have stood out.
In truth, Machu Picchu was always an integral part of the Incan Empire, clearly linked to the entire network of roads that reached back to Cusco and extended for 22,000 kilometers, binding together the longest empire ever forged in the Americas. Built on a strategic spur high above the Urubamba River, it guarded the approaches to the Sacred Valley, while at the same time dominating the eastern lowlands, source of coca, medicinal plants, and shamanic inspiration. But this is just the beginning of the story of Machu Picchu.
The thing is, Johan, what do we really know about who lived here and what these spaces would have looked like in the time of the Inca?
Well, the fine stonework here indicates that they would have been from the Inca elite, or at least the roofs were used for really important religious purposes. Some of these buildings are so well made, the foundations are so good, and the carvings and so on that we're seeing, that it's clear that at least part of the population here, or part of the buildings at least, were used for the Inca nobility. This was an estate of the great Emperor Pachacutic, and in other words, you would have different families associated with his particular royal lineage who would come and stay in this kind of place, and also you would have, for sure, some artisans and other kinds of workers.
We know that Machu Picchu was designed from the start with a single architectural plan, a plan itself conceived within the framework of Incan cosmology and rooted in ancient notions of sacred geography.
Once you get those kind of concepts being built into your head, you come to a place and instead of looking just at the stones, the first thing I do is I look at what's around. And once you have that kind of mindset, frankly, it's not too hard to all of a sudden start to notice that there are these certain alignments taking place.
When you climb some trail like this to Huayna Picchu, you begin to get a sense of what it was like to...
Whoever designed Machu Picchu would have climbed every peak, built high survey platforms to observe by day and night the position of mountains and the movement of constellations.
It's not just like this is sort of a mental Lego kind of game here, an intellectual game, because all of that has its practical consequences, because these are the deities that control the climate, fertility of land, livestock. So you get all of that in there, trade, growing of coca, you name it. Anything that's a vital part of Inca life is affected by these great mountain deities and sacred parts of the landscape.
The two most sacred mountains of the Inca were Alsangati, overlooking the valley of the Coyariti, and Salcantay, which is due south of Machu Picchu. The actual Apu of Machu Picchu is Huayna Picchu, the iconic Sugarloaf Peak which dominates the site. The sacred center of Machu Picchu is the Intihuatana, a curious carved stone that was called by Bingham the itching post of the sun. Johann Reinhardt was the first to notice that the Intihuatana echoed the shape of Huayna Picchu.
Yeah, what drew my attention initially was this play of light on the Intihuatana, the stone, exactly replicating the play of light on the Huayna Picchu, the sacred peak that is due north. And the interesting thing here is that the alignment that continues on due south with this carved stone is in the direction of Salcantay, the major sacred peak of the entire region.
Johann realized that Huayna Picchu, the Intihuatana, and Salcantay were configured in a perfect north-south alignment. But he also noticed that when the Southern Cross rose to its highest point in the sky, it sat directly over the summit of Salcantay. The Southern Cross, enveloped by the Milky Way, was one of the most important constellations to the Inca. And this revelation brought Johann right back to the Urubamba River, which to the Inca was the earthly equivalent of the Milky Way. Like a serpent, the Urubamba embraces Machu Picchu on its run to the Amazon, but the river itself is born on the flank of Osengati, which dominates the site of the Coyariti. Just as the melting snows of Salcantay brought life to Machu Picchu, so the ice and snows of the glaciers overlooking the Sinicata Valley bring inspiration to the people of the Andes today. There is little doubt that the festival of Coyariti has deep pre-Columbian roots, but one must not dismiss 500 years of Christian influence. According to Roman Catholic belief, a miracle happened here centuries ago, when the image of Christ appeared on a rock. A church was built on the site. All night long, men, women, and children line up to light candles and pay homage to the sacred space. But with the dawn, all attention is once again focused on the mountains.
And so it's natural that the people would turn to the mountains to seek gestures of forgiveness, of hope, of promise, of fertility through the ritual dance of culture. And that's what these rituals are. They're not decorative. They're not an excuse to put on costumes. On the contrary, what you find in the Andes is that every single gesture, from the way that a potato is planted to the way that a puka of coca is blown its essence to the apus, to a way that a child has its first hair cutting, everything becomes a prayer for the survival of the community.
For the people of the Andes, ice is water in its purest form. When the men go to the glacier, they are going to the concentrated essence of life itself. This is the climactic moment of the Coyariti. Yesterday the crosses were planted in the ice. Now the Pablitos must make the 800-meter climb to the glacier to retrieve them. In the distance, Ausengati is the first Apu to meet the rising sun. The light moves down its flanks and gradually fills the lower valleys. Many of my friends from Chinchero maintained a vigil through the night at the base of the glacier. Once the sun is up, the crosses come down. They make their way on the backs of the Pablitos, down through the valley, out through the pass, into trucks, and back to their villages. It's a living, dynamic relationship between people, the mountains, and God, a reciprocal trinity of trust and renewal. For the rest of the year, the people of the Andes will hope that they have done their part, so that the heavens and the Apus will provide life anew. The days immediately after the Coyariti and before the Catholic festival of Corpus Christi are a traditional time for people to get married in Chinchero. Everybody wants to take advantage of the blessings of the festival. On this day alone, there will be 6 weddings in the community. The groom can barely hold his head up. He was awake for 3 days at the Coyariti and he just got back last night. All of these dynamic relationships between people and the communities, people and the land, the community within the landscape, the individual within the community, are played out at every level of life in the Andes. You know, it's interesting if you asked a person of the Andes, someone like my friend Nila Kalanaupa, you know, are you pre-Columbian? The question would have no meaning. If you asked her, are you from Spain? The question would have no meaning. Even if you asked her, are you Peruana? I guess she'd sort of feel, yes, this is my country. But if you ask her, are you from Chinchero? Of course. This is the point, is her identity is to the Pan-Andean culture, but especially as reflected in her own community. The interesting question is how the belief system changes the interaction between human beings and the landscape, with obvious consequences for the fate of that land. So when we speak of sacred geography, we're not speaking in terms of some kind of romanticism or some kind of idealized, ethnographic lens upon the world. We're really looking at peoples who, through their belief systems, create relationships of respect that have really profound and concrete consequences in terms of the preservation of the landscape upon which all human beings depend. That's why we use the notion of sacred geography, because the ideas of the natural world, the orientation, the alignments, the respect, all come together to inform a group of people and create the manner in which they live. In the end, we come back to the fundamental question: are these mountains sacred beings, or are they simply inert piles of rock? All I know is that I come from a world in which science, as Saul Bellow wrote, has made a house cleaning of belief. A world that has little place for myth, metaphor, or magic. But I come back to the Andes, year after year, because I find here an opening to another possibility, another dream of the earth. It is May, harvest time.
Sin la coca no sé. Sí. Coca sí es bueno siempre. Da fuerzas.
Friends and neighbors have a breakfast of fresh potato soup and get ready to help Don Geronimo bring in his barley crop.
Mi ahijado, el hijo de exaltación.
These are the people of the Andes, still living on the land of their Incan ancestors.
Pero lo hemos logrado, ¿no?
Sí.
Hemos logrado.
Sí. each step, they are walking through a landscape that they consider to be truly sacred. To them, the land is alive. The mountains are mystical beings. The entire economy of the rural Andes is based on the exchange of labor, reciprocal relationships and obligations, never spoken about but never forgotten. Ritual exchange also defines the relationship between people and the land. Pachamama, Mother Earth, will look after them as long as she is treated with the proper care and reverence. We use too casually this notion, the earth is alive. It's kind of entered the lexicon of what I call hippie ethnography. But in the case of the Andes, they really did believe that the earth was alive, resonant, responsive in 1,000 ways to the human imagination. Indeed, the earth itself only existed because it was filtered through the human imagination. People are getting ready for their annual pilgrimage high into the Andes to make sacrifices and prayers to the mountains. The arrival of the Spaniards in the early 16th century unleashed a cataclysm. But out of that terrible encounter emerged a remarkable pan-Andean culture that draws inspiration from both Christianity and ancient Andean ideas. Beliefs in sacred geography, the relationships to the land, which predated the Inca, were so strong that they survived even the Spanish conquest. The Spaniards did everything in their power to crush the spirit of the Andes, destroying all religious icons and temples. But every time the Spaniards planted a cross or built a church on top of the demolished temple, they simply affirmed in the eyes of the people the inherent sacredness of the place. Chinchero is like a second home to me. I first lived here in 1981 when I came with a team of botanists to study the plants of the valley. Now I have compadres here, and godchildren. Personally, when I go back to Chinchero, I absolutely adore the fact that as I walk into the community, I feel swallowed by the community. Don Geronimo's crops are planted at 3,500 meters in terraced fields. We're standing in one of the birthplaces of agriculture, one of the great centers of plant domestication on the planet. This is a land that gave us not just the tomato and the potato, but countless other vital cultigens. The people of the Andes believe that the fertility of their fields and the success of their crops depends directly on their relationship with the sacred mountains. Every community is dominated by a specific protective deity, a mountain known as an Apu. An Apu is an ancestral being. It is a mountain that oversees your immediate destiny. It is a mountain that rises over every community, and every individual community has its specific Apu. It's not the size of the Apu that matters. It's its placement in sacred geography. You must make offerings to that Apu. That Apu in turn must give you what you need: fertility, rain. So as you propitiate the spirit in the classic Andean reciprocal way, the spirit will come home to benefit you. raised in Canada to believe that those mountains are just inert bodies of rock ready to be mined. The children we've been with in Shincheto know that those are the Apu spirits that will direct their destiny. Is that mountain a pile of ore, or is it a spiritual entity? How a society answers that question ultimately defines how it will treat the land. After helping my friends with the harvest, I want, out of respect, to make my own offering to the Apu of Shincheto. I've come to Cusco Central Market with my friend and colleague, Johan Reinhardt, to buy the right magical ingredients.
Buenas, señora. Señoritas. ¿Tiene despachos para vender?
Libro de San Cipriano, have you ever seen this? This is associated with witchcraft. It's the saint, and people read this and create spells and stuff from it and everything. It's quite big, particularly when they're doing that, even with human sacrifices.
Pig fetus. This is the embryo of a vicuña, so this is quite rare.
It's 100 soles.
100 soles, which
It's $30
or so.
These are the makings of a despacho, a bundle filled with symbolic objects and herbs bound together as an offering. The dried fetuses represent the spirits of unborn animals. In making them part of an offering, I am asking the mountain to continue the cycle of life. There were 6,000 languages spoken on Earth. Now, language is not just a body of grammar, a set of words. A language is a reflection of culture. It's a flash of the human spirit. And of the 6,000 languages spoken on Earth, fully half are being taught to children, which means that effectively, unless something changes, they're dead. What this means is that within a single generation, we may be losing fully half of humanity's intellectual, social, and spiritual legacy. This does not have to happen. These cultures are not failed attempts at being modern. They're unique answers to a fundamental question. What does it mean to be human and alive? Peru is a place I've been many times, but this is an entirely new adventure. A journey of the spirit, a pilgrimage to the sacred heart of the Andes, and light at the edge of the world.
Hasta la cumbre más todo.